I like the way you think.
railroaded you.
No,
so
it's good. As you wish. So let me come back to the crypto discussion. And we're going to if you guys don't mind, we're going to let this panel run a little bit longer because this is just a great dialogue. When we saw the panelists we had today, the spectrum, we weren't quite sure how it was going to get, but I don't think it could get much better. So I wanted, if you guys would stick with us for a few more minutes, and Paul, I know you've got a flight command. I'll make sure you're off stage by 3 o'clock.
Okay.
Deal? Okay, so let's talk about crypto. Come one step up from the blockchain, and Jessica, points well taken. But on the crypto side, this notion, as a capitalist, right, and as an entrepreneur, I struggle with the notion that we're behind. So if you could change one thing about crypto to help us make it where it should be to adopt this, let's start on your side, Jessica. What would you change?
I think one thing that I would change, and I know it's actually being changed right now. We're working on it. We have amazing companies progressing towards this. But the one thing that I would change right now is the ease of it, because like you guys have said, it's, I mean, in my opinion, it's pretty simple to use. But for maybe an older generation, it's really difficult for them to even wrap their head around it. I mean, my grandma still has her checkbook. She's definitely not using a credit card, and she's definitely not going to use crypto. So I think it's the ease, making this a lot easier for the older generation that we need to bring on board and teach them and show them how it is, because we all know that this young generation, they're playing World of Warcraft, they're buying plenty of things with their own crypto. It's easy for them. They get it. They grow up, they want to go to college, pay for their college with crypto, they want to pay for their books, pay for their dog walker. They want to do everything in crypto, and it's easy for them. But my biggest thing would be changing it for our older generation.
Is that a usability issue or is that an availability issue?
Usability and availability. I guess it's kind of a, I mean, if you could buy your ticket here with crypto, then that's cool, but how many of them are coming here? It needs to be usability, like, where do they go? I don't know.
Good.
Olive Garden, like maybe they need to take that. And usability, because if Olive Garden takes it, how is this older person going to understand how to pay with it?
Sure.
So I think that's the one thing I would change.
Tom, how about you?
I think one of the negative byproducts of blockchain and distributed ledgers is that the point of loss is wallets, right? There's been 4 million Bitcoin lost. There's people misplacing private keys. You send it to the wrong address. You get scammed. There's Twitter scams everywhere, Telegram scams. And that's massive cost. I mean, it's billions a year. So I think what would be a very important development is the equivalent of either an arbitration entity or an insurance entity, so you can recover your lost money because of you're paying a small fee to protect yourself from larceny, or each of the blockchains starts to charge you a small fee that essentially acts as like an insurance fund. So
that's a good idea.
I don't know,
It's a great point.
Yeah, I like
Great
that.
point.
Oh, that's a new project, guys. Someone started.
So folks over here, anybody want to tackle that? Well, if you could change one thing about crypto, what would you change?
I mean, regulatory certainty is something that I think would really help the industry. I mean, and I think what you're pointing about, Tom, too, is that it hurts the industry. It's hard for someone to make a decision to develop. Venture capital money is flooding into this industry. At the same time, I think even more would be coming this way. There'd be more development if there were regulatory certainty about what's going to happen and how, and particularly the SEC is going to treat it. The SEC gave an early blessing to Bitcoin, gave a really interesting blessing to Ether, saying that Ether probably was a security and now isn't. So go forth and sin no more. This was kind of an amazing thing, but there's a lot. I think the rules of the road are not clear. I think we don't know, to mix my metaphors, where the white lines are and where the government is going to allow industry to develop. And until that happens, industry won't develop to the scale that it could otherwise. And I think that the SEC is close to that. I mean, there's a lot of talk. If you were asking financial people and speculators, the thing that they want the most is a solution around custody, so that they know that an institutional investor could invest in crypto, and there are suggestions that maybe someone like Goldman Sachs or UBS might have a solution right around the corner. That certainly would make a difference in terms of the price of certain crypto assets. I think, the day that happens, Bitcoin, Ether, XRP, maybe Litecoin, you'll see a lot more trading of that. Now, there might be buy the rumor, sell the news, but I think that ultimately that will allow institutional assets to come into the space. I don't really care about that. I want the technological solutions. I think the price is the tail and the uses are the dog. We need to have some solutions that allow industry to develop.
Yeah.
Thanks, Corey.
Regulatory solutions. that is.
Thank you. Lily, Paul, care to offer an opinion?
Just if there's a way to do this so that the transactions costs come down to, conventional means of payment, then that would remove at least my major objection. It wouldn't necessarily sell me on it, but it would say that the big objection would go away. Right now it's just, for most purposes, a clearly inferior means of payment. And if there's a solution to that, fine.
Great. Thank you.
And I think also to increase mass adoption, it's not as much about ease of use as more about motivation. Why do I want to use Bitcoin as opposed to the dollar? That's a lot more stable, less volatility. It's not going to change value, from 1 second to another.
Unless you're in Turkey.
Yeah, I was going to
Unless
say
you're
unless you're in
Turkey.
Turkey. And who knows in the U.S., because I feel like there's some...
Right. So
Tension.
there are, for example, say if you're in, Venezuela and you have hyperinflation, you have a motivation to use Bitcoin, right? Because you want to store your value in something that, the entire world agrees has value, right? And that's a lot more liquid than, say, buying land or real estate. You can buy and sell it. So that's one type of motivation, right? But in terms of everyday use, like paying for things, like Paul said, we have Venmo, we have PayPal. They're very easy to use. If I, want to dispute a transaction, I can easily do that with PayPal. I cannot do that with Bitcoin. That's, one of the but good and bad things about Bitcoin, right, in terms of mass adoption. Yeah. So, that's one of the biggest things, I think, is motivation, and also educating people on why Bitcoin has value, right? And at this point, it only has value in situations where people are unable to put their money somewhere for, like, in Venezuela or whenever there's hyperinflation. But in everyday use, it's too much of a learning curve for the everyday consumer to start using Bitcoin, in my opinion.
But
that's just the reality of things.
I think it'll turn into like what this Venmo and PayPal is doing. It will be the exact same thing in the future. It's only natural evolution. How far we've come from pebbles and stones and gold and dollars to crypto, I think it just seems normal. Are we done?
No. So you guys, if I can, we've got about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
And this is terrific, and I want to keep it going, but we do have to get Paul off stage. So I'm going to ask Denise to bring us home with a cleanup question, and then we'll wrap
I would
it.
like to ask, since you are naysayer, and we do have to
Right.
get you off stage first. So if Bitcoin fails, what are some of the unintended consequences?
Okay.
Or are there any?
Well, look, any asset that people that sees a sharp fall in the value is going to cause some disruptions. But so I think of it as there are two kinds of asset crashes. We had dot-coms and we had the housing bubble. Dot-com crash was kind of trouble for the economy, but it wasn't that serious. Housing bubble was catastrophe.
Absolutely.
Question is Bitcoin more like the dot-com or the housing bubble? And we can talk a little bit about what was the difference. And there's really two big differences. The most important is whether the asset was purchased with lots of leverage, whether people who bought that asset were extending themselves, and particularly whether financial institutions were buying that asset or derivatives from it with leverage, which was not the case for dot-coms, but was very much the case for mortgage-backed securities. The reason that the housing crash in dollar terms wasn't that much bigger than the dot-com crash, but the knock-on consequences were vastly worse.
Absolutely.
Because of the leverage and all that. So, all right, at this point, Bitcoin looks much more like dot-coms than that. We don't have financial institutions really sticking their necks that far out. We certainly don't have that much leverage-based buying. And in terms of disruption of the payment system, if you guys are right and Bitcoin becomes a big deal, that would become a big problem. But it's not now. Now it'd be a big disruption in the payment system for banned substances. But that's not something we worry about all that much. So I think it would be a shock to the system, but not a really big one. Um,